this part. Orange peel pocket I have a full post on, which I'll link to, and I break it down more. This is one of the only books that I found that's centered on a transracial adoptee. However, it's written by her mother, who is a white woman, right? At least it's illustrated by an Asian person, which explains why she does not have squinty slant eyes. So I'm just going to focus on this one part where her teacher pulls down a map, and then everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, it's China!" And everybody just looks right over to her and is like, "Explain China to us. What's it like, you friend?" Now here's the problem, and this is going to happen to basically all Asian Americans, or it does happen, where we are seen as like this monolithic whole. Native Asians who are born and raised in Asia, people who are what we call fresh off the boat, people who, like my father, who moved here when they were like teenagers, and they kind of assimilate or half assimilate, and then you have the people who are American Chinese to varying degrees, how we kind of over the generations are either forcefully or choose to assimilate into a whiter American culture. Now, orange peel. She has a Chinese name. They choose not to say it because they can't pronounce it. Orange peel. They call it orange peel, which is like calling a black baby watermelon, and it's ridiculous and gross. So Chan Ming has all these children look to her, which is, it happens in elementary school. You're the only Chinese person in the class. You learn about the country of China, and everyone just looks right at you, and they ask you if you eat dogs. So they look to her, and they expect her to educate them. The teacher, it's her job to talk about China clearly. Why isn't she doing that work? Why is it on this child who has no memory of living in China? Because she was adopted as a baby. Why is it her job? Because it's always the obligation of the person of color, the person from the marginalized community, to self-advocate, to educate for free, for the betterment of the white people in her classroom. So that's an issue. Now, she's seen as this monolithic person, the perpetual foreigner. They still see her as Chinese rather than a Chinese American, an American person just like them who is also learning about China. Does that make sense? So who takes on the burden of educating white folks? It's always going to be the transracial adoptee, particularly as they get older. White parents aren't really expected to know anything about China, even if they have Chinese family members or spouses. Although they do frequently claim some authority on it because they love someone who is Chinese, right? Which is annoying. And I can say this because it's a locked post. My mom can't see it, but my mom does this a lot. There's a lot of parading your Asian child down in like the little doll dress and showing how, I hate this word, how woke you are, that you're willing to have a child of color, and kind of fetishizing them and objectifying them to show how progressive you are, or kind, or giving. Now, here's a question. Who gets to adopt in this country, at least? Many of you are probably aware an amazing civil rights advocate named Carrie Ann Lucas passed away recently, I think last month. There's just a whole thing. You need to Google her and find out about her. She was a disabled parent who advocated for keeping her children. Now, this is something that disabled people live with constant fear of. Are our children going to be taken away? Who do we disclose and who do we not disclose to? If I tell my doctor at the ER that I'm autistic, is he going to call DCF, which is the Child Services, and just, check on me, right? To make sure that I'm actually a competent parent. It's something that we live in a great deal of fear over. So Carrie Ann Lucas had an uphill battle to fight to adopt and maintain custody of her children because she was disabled, because her children were disabled. This does happen to non-disabled parents who fight to keep custody of their disabled children because the state believes that they'd be better off in an institution, which is just not true. That's where abuse happens a lot. Not like parents don't abuse their kids. Disability Day of Mourning, please look that up. Okay, so who gets to adopt? Rich, white, non-disabled, cishet people. There's still, pushback against gay adoption, and there's pushback against, people of color because of the intersecting issues of wealth and employment opportunities that create these distant barriers. So you can't say, oh, I'm not going to let you adopt because you're autistic. You can be like, oh, I see that you're autistic. You're probably going to have a hard time. I noticed that you have a reputation of going to the ER for meltdowns, or you have a reputation of only keeping basic retail jobs because you need a script. Therefore, you cannot adopt. And that is something I have had to think of. Is it worth going to the ER for post-pregnancy anxiety if it means that my options to adopt 5 years down the road are eliminated? And that's something that parents have to deal with as to whether or not they want to lose those options. Who gets to adopt? People with privilege. Who do we adopt from? Now, the people we adopt from are the people whose gestational parents don't have choices and don't have support in parenting, right? I think it's pretty obvious that if most gestational parents had a reasonable life ahead of them, where they had rent and they had food and they had health care, they would keep their biological children. That would be not all people's choices, but maybe a lot more people would choose to do that. But we're not giving those people those supports. We're giving them support to put their children up for adoption. So we have a history in the United States and also in other countries for targeting Indigenous people of ripping Indigenous children out of their communities and putting them in residential schools and forcefully assimilating them and adopting them into white culture in white families. And this is considered a way of saving them and a way of helping them conform to the new civilization, as if their civilization was somehow worse or backwards or a thing of the past, which they are not. That's obviously white supremacy in play. In the 90s and the aughts, we had Chinese and Russian adoptions, because after yellow peril started to die down, we're seeing a lot less yellow peril. It's still subtle, this idea that Asian people are dangerous and devious and dragon ladies and spies. To prove that you are beyond that Orientalism and that racism, you adopt an Asian baby. And then those cute little Asian girls, you're rescuing them from this terrible sexist country, and you're showing how progressive you are. People who weren't really as progressive and they wanted white babies, they adopted from Russia. Also super problematic, and there's a reason why that's been banned. So, same thing, countries that have been under, through civil war, through wars. Korea had a big influx of adoptions in the 80s and the 90s. Natural disasters, there was a huge influx of Haitian adoptions after the Haiti had a natural disaster, which is horrifying, because if you think on top of having famines and floods and earthquakes, and then also your children whose parents might have died, but the children of the community, the future of your community is taken and whisked away across the world. Is that better for that community? Or would that community be better served by healthcare and supports and disaster relief? That seems like a simple question to me, but obviously one of them is much harder, and one of them makes white people feel really good about themselves. So, in the post-Reagan over-policing, broken windows epidemic, where we had a lot of Black parents being put in prison, an uptick in that, now we have a lot of Black children who are being adopted. Particularly Black boys are being adopted because Black girls are still perceived as being too hard to place. Hard to place is code for being not white, being darker skinned, being older, having a sibling, having a disability. And then, of course, we have the heroin epidemic, which is how many adopted families are starting now, is with the issue of gestational parents who do not feel safe getting prenatal care, even though they want their babies. They want to keep their babies and they want their babies safe. But if they go for prenatal care, they will be put into jail, or they will be it'll be automatic that their children will be taken away once they're born, which is horrifying. So now Monica posted this thing on Facebook, and it pointed out how genocidal acts defined by the UN include forcible transfer of children imposed by direct force or through fear of violence, duress, detention, psychological oppression, or other methods of coercion. Taking a child out of a marginalized community and adopting them into the oppressor's community is a form of genocide. And again, I'm asking you to understand that your family is great if you have an adoptive family or not, and it's the best one for your child, and we are complicit in genocide. I know this is hard. I know it hurts. We can get through it. It doesn't mean you have to give your children back. Now, here we have the safety pin paradox. We have this idea of transracial adoption as a tool to solve racism, right? Well, I will adopt a black son. I will give him all of our money and our wonderful school system. I will keep him healthy and get him vaccinated. And then he will grow up and he will still be a black man, right? He still has to worry about things that I might not know to teach him as an Asian woman. So the problem is, people with privilege, white parents, clearly willing to do the work. They want to solve racism. The problem, and parenting is hard. That's like the hardest possible of the jobs that you could take on is the one where you have to get up every 3 minutes and deal with raising a child, right? So willing to do the work, not willing to listen. Not listening and assuming that white saviors know better is the main problem here. What do marginalized groups actually need and tell us that they want and need for equality? Has any marginalized group said, you know what we really need is we need you to take some of our babies because we want to get rid of these things. The whole reason we exist is for our babies and to help them and the next generation move up. The last thing we want is to lose them and to get rid of them, right? To offload them onto our oppressors. So, keep families together. That's going around now. Why do we care about keeping these families together? I think it's because we see pictures of their parents. We see pictures of the children because we're not gaining from the separation the way we are when pictures of first parents are being erased from the picture entirely. Some of the children who are being separated at the border are, and I haven't double checked this to make sure it's actually valid, but I've seen headlines about them being adopted out. Either way, they're in group homes, they're in institutions, they're in little prisons, baby prisons. That's not a solution to anything. Okay. We'll move on to the next part. Next.